Sometimes one quiet sentence can change everything. When a single dad janitor at an Air Force base looked at the general's hand and said, "My daughter has this ring too," the entire cafeteria froze. What began as a passing remark soon unraveled a secret buried for 30 years, one that would restore honor, heal a family, and prove that kindness can outlive even time itself. Before we begin this powerful true-to-life story of love, redemption, and legacy, we invite you to stay with us till the end. And if stories like this touch your heart, make sure to subscribe to our channel, Soul Moment Story, where every story reminds us that quiet heroes walk among us every day. Now, let's begin. The morning sun leaked through the blinds of the Air Force Base cafeteria, painting thin golden stripes across rows of stainless steel tables. The room hummed with the sounds of ordinary duty forks, clinking boots, scuffing the hiss of the coffee machine, steaming into metal mugs. It was a rhythm everyone knew by heart. Liam Cross wiped down the same corner table he always did at 700 hours. He moved quietly, methodically, with the kind of patience that only comes from someone who's learned to listen more than speak. His green fatigues, once a uniform of valor, now a janitor's workwear, still fit neatly, though time had softened their color to the muted olive of forgotten missions. His long hair was tied back neatly, revealing a face marked not by age, but by endurance. He had been there for 3 years, cleaning, fixing coffee machines, replacing light bulbs no one else noticed. Some of the younger airmen called him Mr. Cross, others just the janitor. None of them knew that the man who handed them extra napkins had once flown rescue missions off the Pacific, dropping into raging seas to pull men out of fire and salt water. He didn't tell stories anymore. He just smiled, wiped tables, and went home to his daughter. Kira, 8 years old, bright as the Arizona sun, and the reason he still woke up before dawn. Every morning before his shift, he'd braid her hair and pack her lunch, always, with a handwritten note that said the same thing, "For my brave girl." It was something her mother used to say before the world collapsed in a hospital explosion 8 years ago, a moment that turned a rescue pilot into a quiet janitor. The cafeteria smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee when the chatter changed. Soldiers stopped mid-sentence, heads turning toward the doorway. That was when she walked in. General Faith Lawson. Her presence sliced through the morning calm like the edge of a saluting sword. She was the newly appointed commanding officer of the base, a woman whose reputation carried the weight of precision and pride. Her uniform was immaculate. Rows of ribbons shining under the fluorescent lights, her expression unreadable but commanding. Liam froze for half a heartbeat, a reflex he hadn't felt in years. Not fear recognition, maybe. Something about the way she carried herself reminded him of another time, another life. The general scanned the room briefly, her eyes missing nothing. She nodded at a few officers before making her way toward the coffee counter. Her boots clicked with an authority that made even the hum of conversation lower itself. Liam, already behind the counter cleaning a spill, straightened instinctively. "Morning, ma'am," he said, polite, steady. She returned a small nod, reaching for a cup. "Thank you, Mr. Cross." Liam Cross. Her eyes flicked toward his name tag, then back to the cup. "Appreciate your work, Mr. Cross. Just doing my part, ma'am." He turned, slightly reaching for the carafe, when something caught the corner of his eye. A flash of green stone, carved and smooth, gleaming under the cafeteria lights. The general's left hand rested on the counter where she wore a ring. A silver band, set with a jade green stone, carved into the faint shape of a phoenix, spreading its wings. Liam's hand stopped mid-motion. That ring. His breath caught the world, narrowing to that single piece of jade. He had seen that ring every night before Kira's bedtime, when his daughter would hold her mother's keepsake to her chest and whisper, "Good night, Mommy." The twin to the one before him, identical down to the carved wing on the left side of the stone. Liam's throat tightened. He heard his own voice before he could stop it. "Ma'am," he said, quietly, almost to himself. "My daughter has a ring just like that." The words hung in the air, strange and heavy. Faith Lawson looked up, puzzled. "I'm sorry." He nodded faintly toward her hand. "That ring. The green stone, it's the same. My little girl's mother left her one exactly like it." A flicker passed across the general's face, surprise, confusion, and something sharper. "This ring," she said slowly, "is a family heirloom. There's only one of its kind." Liam's eyes met hers, steady, searching, but gentle. "Then someone lied, ma'am." The hum of the cafeteria seemed to fade away. A spoon clattered onto a tray somewhere behind them, but no one spoke. The young airmen who had been laughing seconds ago were now pretending not to listen, though every pair of eyes had shifted toward the counter. Faith Lawson's jaw tightened. She wasn't a woman accustomed to being questioned, least of all by a janitor. But there was something in his tone, not defiance, but quiet certainty that unsettled her. "Are you implying something, Mr. Cross?" "No, ma'am," he said softly. "Just saying what I know." For a moment, neither of them moved. The ring glinted between them, two worlds colliding in a single flash of green light. Faith cleared her throat, straightened her back. "Well, Mr. Cross, I suggest you remind your daughter that imitation jewelry isn't uncommon." Her tone was firm, final. She picked up her cup and turned away. But as she walked toward the officer's table, she couldn't help glancing at her ring again, as if seeing it for the first time. Liam stood still, cloth in hand, heart pounding with questions he didn't know how to ask. He wasn't trying to challenge anyone. He hadn't spoken to a general in years, let alone startled one. But the moment he saw that ring, something deep and wordless had stirred inside him, like hearing the echo of a promise made long ago. Across the room, General Lawson sat down, her composure, perfect, as always. But she didn't take a sip of her coffee. Her hand hovered over the cup, the jade glinting against her skin. Her thoughts were no longer on the base or the reports waiting on her desk. They were in another decade, dusty sunlight, a family portrait, and a name she hadn't heard in years. Liam watched quietly from the counter, wiping the same spot over and over. He didn't know it yet, but with one simple sentence, he had cracked open the door to a secret buried for decades, one that would change not just his life, but hers. And outside, through the cafeteria windows, the morning sun climbed higher, bright and unassuming, shining over two people who had just awakened, a story neither of them was ready to face. The next morning, the cafeteria was quieter than usual. Maybe it was the gray light spilling through the clouds, or maybe it was the memory of what had happened the day before, a moment so brief that most would have forgotten it. But not Faith Lawson, and not Liam Cross. Faith entered with her usual composure, yet there was a subtle weight to her steps. Her uniform, immaculate as always, couldn't disguise the unease beneath the polished brass. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. She didn't need to. People naturally stood a little straighter in her presence. Liam was behind the counter, again pouring coffee for the early shift pilots. He nodded politely as she approached, but her gaze wasn't on him this time. It was on her own hand on the ring. The same jade phoenix that had caught the janitor's eye yesterday. She turned it slightly, watching how the morning light caught the green stone. For the first time in years, it looked foreign. "Morning," General Liam said gently. She blinked, breaking her trance. "Good morning, Mr. Cross." Their voices were calm, polite, too polite. The kind of careful civility that hides a storm underneath. Faith reached for her cup, but her hand hesitated just long enough for Liam to notice. The air felt heavier between them. He wasn't sure why he spoke again, only that he had to. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, where did you get that ring?" Her eyes lifted sharp and questioning. "Excuse me, I don't mean any disrespect," he said quickly. "It's just, my late wife had one just like it. Passed it down to our daughter." Faith's expression stayed composed, but her voice carried a faint tremor. "This ring belonged to my family for decades. It was my brother Jacob's idea, a twin set, he said, 2 phoenixes rising together. But the second ring was lost years ago. There's only one now." Liam's breath faltered. A twin set. The world seemed to tilt slightly under his feet. "Then someone must have found it," he said quietly, "because my wife had one. Same design. She called it her promise ring." Faith's gaze sharpened. "Your wife's name, Linda." "Linda Cross." He paused. "She passed away 8 years ago." Faith's hand tightened around the cup knuckles pale. Something deep within her memory stirred an echo of a name she couldn't yet grasp. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Cross." "Thank you, ma'am." She turned, slightly ready to walk away. But curiosity, no unease, anchored her there. "You said your daughter wears it?" Liam nodded. "She never takes it off." The general gave a small, stiff nod and left the counter without another word. But as she sat down at her table, her mind wasn't in the cafeteria anymore. 2 phoenixes, a twin set. Jacob's voice echoed faintly in memory, her older brother laughing in the sun the day he presented the rings. "One for you, Faith, and the other, maybe for the one who'll carry our family forward." She had teased him, then called it sentimental nonsense. He had gone missing 2 years later on a classified mission. The ring was all she had left of him. Now, decades later, a janitor's quiet words had reopened that old wound. Faith lifted her hand again, staring at the jade's carved wings. Her thoughts swirled with impossible questions. Could it be a coincidence, a replica, or something more? Across the room, Liam continued wiping tables, pretending not to notice her glances. Inside, though, his mind was spinning. He'd seen that reaction before, the flash of shock, the instant denial. But what if she wasn't denying him? What if she was denying something she didn't want to face? That night after Kira went to bed, Liam sat alone at the small kitchen table of their base housing unit. The light above flickered softly. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside lay the second ring, the same jade phoenix. Next to it, the faded photograph of his wife in her nurse uniform smiling shyly beside a young naval officer. The man's arm was around her shoulder. His uniform bore the name Lawson. Liam frowned. He'd seen that photo hundreds of times, but never really looked at the details until now. The same last name as the general's. Coincidence, maybe. But after today, coincidence felt like a fragile word. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded blue ink, "For Faith. Keep the promise." His heart stopped for a second. Faith. He whispered the name like a confession. It couldn't be. Could it? Liam leaned back, closing his eyes, the weight of memory pressing down like a tide. He remembered the day Linda showed him the ring for the first time. She'd smiled and said, "It's a promise between my father and his sister." He told her he'd come back one day. I guess the promise is mine to keep now. He'd thought it was just a family story. Now the truth flickered in front of him like a candle in the wind. The next morning, Faith Lawson didn't appear in the cafeteria. Liam spent the day distracted, barely noticing the time. Every sound reminded him of that ring, the way the light had hit it, the way she'd looked at him. When his shift ended, he walked home with the Arizona sun dipping low behind him, the box in his backpack feeling heavier than it should. At home, Kira was waiting by the window, her ring glinting on her small hand as she waved. "Daddy, look, I drew Mommy's ring again." Liam smiled faintly and knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did a great job, sweetheart. Mommy said this ring means we keep promises," she said proudly. His throat tightened. "Yeah, baby, it does." He looked at the ring on her finger, identical to the one on the general's hand. and felt the world narrowing around that small green stone. Somewhere across the base, Faith Lawson sat alone in her office, her desk lamp burning late into the night. The ring on her finger caught the same light that glowed through Kira's window miles away. 2 phoenixes, 2 promises, and a truth that neither of them was ready to face. Outside, the desert wind whispered through the flagpoles, carrying with it the scent of dust and memory. Something old was awakening something both sacred and painful. Tomorrow, the general would demand answers, and the janitor who once flew into fire would be ready to give them. The following morning dawned sharp and cold over the base. Wind swept fine dust across the flight line, and the sky was a thin, brittle blue. Inside the cafeteria, life returned to its usual rhythm, clatter-chatter, the hum of early duty. But beneath that routine hum, something in the air had changed. Faith Lawson entered right on time, but this time her presence drew more than just attention. It drew whispers. The rumor had spread fast. The janitor had said something to the new general. No one knew exactly what, but people could feel it. The airmen avoided eye contact, afraid to cross invisible lines of rank or rumor. Liam was already there, wiping the same tables, eyes low, pretending the world hadn't shifted beneath his boots. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the 2 rings glimmered in his mind, like twin stars, his wife's and the general's. When Faith appeared at the counter, the chatter died away. "Morning, ma'am," Liam said quietly, his voice steady but subdued. She studied him for a long second before answering. "Mr. Cross," her tone was crisp official. "About what you said yesterday?" Liam looked up, meeting her gaze. "Yes, ma'am." Faith hesitated. Every instinct told her to dismiss this conversation, to restore the order that kept her world precise and controlled. But curiosity, a force she had long buried under discipline, pulled at her. "This ring," she said, turning her hand slightly, so the green jade caught the light. "It is not something that can be copied." Liam wiped his hands on a cloth. "With respect, ma'am, I'm not saying it is. I'm saying there's another one exactly the same." Her eyes narrowed, her posture stiffening. "Mr. Cross, do you understand what you're implying? That an heirloom from my family isn't the only one," he finished quietly. "Yes, ma'am. I do." The silence that followed was heavy. Faith's jaw tightened. To anyone else it might have looked like indignation, but beneath that steel was confusion, and something even rarer. Doubt. "Are you suggesting your wife stole it?" Her words came out sharper than intended. Liam's expression didn't change, but his eyes dimmed. "No, ma'am. Linda wasn't that kind of person." Faith exhaled slowly, almost regretting her tone. "Then what are you suggesting?" He glanced down, folding the cloth neatly in his hands. "That maybe we don't know the whole story." Faith straightened. "The story is simple, Mr. Cross. This ring was commissioned for my family decades ago. My brother designed it before he—" She stopped herself. "Before he was lost." Liam's brow furrowed. "Your brother?" "Yes. Jacob Lawson. He served in the Navy." Something flickered across Liam's face, recognition mixed with disbelief. "Lawson." She gave him a measured look. "You seem to know the name." He shook his head slightly. "No, ma'am. It's just my wife's maiden name was Lawson, too." Faith froze. The cafeteria seemed to vanish around her, replaced by the low roar of her heartbeat. "Lawson?" The name hung between them like a bridge forming out of thin air. "That's a common name," she said, but the firmness in her voice faltered. Liam nodded, though his tone carried quiet conviction. "Maybe. But there's nothing common about those rings." The moment stretched. Every sound in the cafeteria, every clatter of trays, every voice faded into static. For the first time in her long career, Faith Lawson found herself without words. Finally, she straightened her composure, returning like armor snapping into place. "Mr. Cross," she said evenly, "you've clearly mistaken a coincidence for a connection. I suggest we leave it at that." He nodded, but his eyes were searching hers, not for defiance, but for truth. "Yes, ma'am." Faith turned sharply, walking toward the exit. But as she passed the reflective glass of the cafeteria doors, she caught sight of herself. The black uniform, the green stone, flashing faintly under the light. And for one strange second, she saw another woman's face, instead of her own. A younger version. A sister. A promise. A man in a Navy uniform smiling beside her. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed the door open. Liam watched her leave a heaviness settling in his chest. He hadn't meant to offend her. He'd only wanted to understand. For years, he had wondered why Linda never spoke about her family. Why every time he asked, she'd change the subject. Her eyes soft, but distant. Now he wondered if she'd been protecting him from something. Or someone. That night, Faith sat in her office long after the base had gone quiet. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. Her eyes kept drifting to the ring on her hand, to the faint carving of the phoenix, its wings outstretched, forever frozen in ascent. Jacob's face flashed in her memory, his laughter, his promise. "One for you, Faith, and one for the future." She clenched her jaw. No, it couldn't be. That ring was destroyed or lost with him. But the janitor's calm voice echoed back to her. "My daughter has one just like it." She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old folder. Inside was Jacob's file, at least what was left of it. Classified stamps, redactions everywhere. Officially, he had been declared MIA. Unofficially, rumors had whispered a different story. Faith's hand hovered over the file, her mind at war. She had built her career on control, on never letting emotion dictate command. But this was different. This was personal. She picked up the phone. "Colonel Davis," she said when the line clicked. "I need access to the personnel records for a civilian contractor named Liam Cross." "Yes, the janitor." "Former Navy rescue pilot. Pull his service file, medical history, anything you can find." The colonel hesitated. "Understood, ma'am." "May I ask, what for?" Faith's gaze drifted back to the jade ring. "Because something doesn't add up, Colonel. And I intend to find out what." When she hung up, she sat back, the weight of the past pressing down. For the first time in years, she felt the walls of her own certainty begin to crack. Across the base in a small two-bedroom housing unit, Liam tucked Kira into bed. She smiled sleepily, the ring on her finger glinting in the lamplight. "Daddy," she murmured. "Mommy said this ring was magic. Do you think that's true?" He brushed her hair back, gently forcing a smile. "I think it keeps promises," he said. "What kind of promises? The kind people never break." As Kira drifted off to sleep, Liam sat beside her, the box with the photograph and the twin ring resting in his hands. He looked at the photo again, the faded handwriting, for Faith. Keep the promise. Somewhere on the base, Faith Lawson was staring at the same words in her memory. Neither of them knew it yet, but the storm had already begun. The desert wind moaned softly outside the small base housing unit, brushing against the cracked windows like the whisper of an old memory. Inside, the light from a single lamp spilled across Liam Cross's kitchen table, turning the worn wood a muted amber. He sat there, elbows on the table, staring at the small wooden box in front of him, the one he hadn't opened in years. Kira had gone to bed hours ago, her soft breathing steady through the thin wall that separated her room from his. It was the quiet hour between midnight and dawn, when even the hum of the refrigerator sounded too loud. Liam turned the box over in his hands, thumb tracing the small nick in the lid, the one his wife had once laughed about, saying she liked things that looked a little broken. He hesitated. Some boxes were never meant to be opened again. But the image of General Faith Lawson's face wouldn't leave him the shock, the disbelief, the way her hand trembled around that green ring. He flipped the latch. Inside lay the things he'd kept from another life, a few letters, a flight badge, and wrapped in a small linen cloth, the twin jade ring. Its surface caught the light just enough to reveal the carved phoenix wings extended in eternal flight. Beneath it was a photograph he hadn't looked at since the funeral, the edges worn, the colors faded like an old promise. He lifted it gently. The image showed two people standing side by side, a man in a Navy officer's uniform, his smile warm but reserved, and a young woman in medical whites. She looked radiant, proud, a glint of sunlight in her hair. Linda. His wife. Liam felt his throat tighten. He brushed a thumb over the man beside her. The name Patch was barely visible but still legible under the crease J. Lawson. His heartbeat quickened. Lawson. The same name that haunted the ring on Faith's finger. He turned the photo over. The handwriting was faint, shaky as if written in haste. For Faith. Keep the promise. He read it again, his breath catching. Faith. Not Faith the word, but Faith the person. General Faith Lawson. He leaned back in his chair, the air in the room suddenly thin. The memory of Linda's stories drifted back, pieces, fitting together, in ways he hadn't dared to imagine. She used to speak of her father, sometimes a man who disappeared when she was young, a man she believed was betrayed by the very people he served. And now, decades later, his daughter wore a ring that connected them all. Liam stood abruptly pacing the room. His mind raced, tracing back years of fragments and half-truths. Had Linda known who her aunt was? Had she wanted to tell him but couldn't? Or was she protecting someone or something by keeping silent? He looked again at the photo, at the steady gaze of the man beside her. There was something in that face. Quiet honor, grief, and pride. The kind of face that carried the burden of command. Jacob Lawson. If he truly was Faith's brother, then Linda was her niece, and Kira, her grandniece. The revelation struck him with a weight, both holy and terrible. He sank into the chair, hands trembling slightly, as he stared at the photograph. Linda, he whispered, his voice breaking. What were you trying to tell me? The air seemed to hold its breath. For years, Liam had lived quietly, a man reduced by loss, content to fade into the background. But now the past was pulling him back, demanding to be seen. The photo wasn't just proof of connection, it was evidence of something larger, something hidden. The signature on the back, "Keep the Promise," sounded less like sentiment and more like instruction. He looked toward Kira's door, imagining her sleeping peacefully, the little jade ring catching the faint light from the hallway. He suddenly felt protective, almost afraid. If this ring connected his family to something buried, something powerful enough to have been erased from history, then he needed to know the truth for her sake. He closed the box gently and slipped it into his duffel bag. Tomorrow, he'd find a way to talk to the general again, not as a janitor, but as a man searching for the truth. Across the base in her private quarters, General Faith Lawson sat on the edge of her bed, unable to sleep. The room was immaculate, every detail precise, yet the order gave her no peace. Her eyes kept returning to the ring on her hand. Jacob's ring. She had worn it every day since the Navy had declared him dead 30 years ago. But the words of the janitor kept echoing in her mind. My daughter has a ring just like that. It shouldn't have been possible. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she saw her brother's handwriting again, the same looped F in her name, the same scrawl she hadn't seen since she was 23. Faith rose and walked to her desk. She pulled open the top drawer, retrieving a file marked Lawson Jacob. Classified. It had been heavily redacted when she'd last seen it. Even as a general, she hadn't been able to access the full truth. But now she noticed something she hadn't before a small notation on the bottom. Personal effects recovered 1 ring delivered to next of kin, delivered to her. So how could there be another? Her mind churned. A twin set. That's what Jacob had said. She had brushed it off as a joke, one for him, one for her. But maybe he hadn't been joking. Maybe he'd made them for another reason entirely. Faith poured herself a glass of water, her hand trembling slightly. She had spent her life commanding soldiers, negotiating treaties, holding together crumbling chains of command. But nothing in all her years had prepared her for this, the possibility that a piece of her family had survived somewhere she hadn't thought to look. A janitor's little girl. The thought tugged at something deep inside her. Could Linda Liam's wife have been Jacob's daughter? The timeline fit. The ages matched. But how had she never known? Faith sank into her chair, staring at the ring. The green stone caught the faint glow of her desk lamp, flickering like a heartbeat. For the first time in decades, she felt something fragile stir inside her chest. Hope. But with it came fear. Because if the ring had resurfaced, then so had the truth Jacob died protecting. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line beneath her brother's name. Find Linda Cross. Then, after a long pause, she added, Find Liam Cross. At dawn, Liam stood outside his quarters, the wooden box in his bag, and determination in his eyes. The sun was breaking over the desert horizon, painting the base in orange and gold. He looked out across the runway, where jets were already warming their engines, the noise familiar, yet distant. Once he'd been one of them, a rescuer, a man with wings. Now he was a janitor with a photograph and a promise. But in that moment, as the first light touched the twin rings sleeping in his pocket, and the one glowing on the general's hand miles away, it felt like something old and sacred was awakening again. The past wasn't done with either of them. Not yet. The night refused to end. General Faith Lawson had spent most of her career mastering the art of stillness, an officer's mind trained to remain sharp through crisis, detached through chaos. Yet as the desert wind hissed against her office window, she found herself pacing like a restless cadet, haunted by a janitor's quiet words. The jade ring on her hand caught the pale moonlight glowing faintly green. She twisted it slowly, her pulse matching the rhythm of its rotation. The base was silent now. Even the security patrols had faded into the background hum of engines cooling in the dark. But Faith's mind was alive with ghosts. She turned toward the folder lying open on her desk. Jacob Lawson's file, its corners frayed from years of being pulled out, stared at, and put away again. Her brother's smiling face looked back at her from a yellowed photograph clipped to the first page, the confident young commander, proud and certain. He had disappeared 3 decades earlier during a classified mission in the South Pacific, declared missing in action later, branded as a traitor by those who rewrote his story. Faith had never believed it. She'd spent years chasing whispers, trying to clear his name, until the military bureaucracy smothered her with silence. And now, a janitor's daughter wore a ring identical to his. Faith rubbed her temples. It was absurd, impossible. And yet her instincts, the same instincts that had saved her in countless command decisions, told her there was truth buried beneath the coincidence. She picked up the phone. "Colonel Davis," she said when the line clicked. Her voice, though calm, carried an undertone of urgency. "Did you find that file I requested?" "Yes, ma'am," came the reply, scratchy through the late-hour static. "Liam Cross, former Navy rescue pilot, honorably discharged after sustaining injuries in a hospital explosion 8 years ago." Faith's breath caught. "The same explosion that killed his wife, yes, General." Civilian casualties included a Linda Cross registered nurse, married to Liam Cross. Left behind, one daughter, Kira. Faith sat back in her chair, her hand tightening on the receiver. Do we have a maiden name for Mrs. Cross? There was a pause. Yes, ma'am. Lawson. Linda Lawson Cross. Faith closed her eyes. The sound of the colonel's voice blurred into static. For a long, suspended moment, she didn't move. Lawson. Her brother's name. Her niece. She swallowed hard, forcing air into her lungs. Thank you, Colonel. That'll be all. When she hung up, she sat motionless, her gaze locked on the photograph of Jacob. For 30 years, she had believed his bloodline ended, with him wiped away by rumor and shame. But now, in a modest base housing unit barely 2 blocks away, his granddaughter was alive. Faith stood abruptly, her uniform jacket still hanging from the back of the chair. She grabbed her car keys. Sleep could wait. The road between command housing and the enlisted quarters was empty. The base floodlights cast long white streaks across the asphalt, slicing through the night like frozen lightning. Faith drove fast, her thoughts racing faster. She didn't know what she was going to say. She only knew she had to see it with her own eyes, to see the girl, the ring, the proof. When she reached the small row of duplexes at the edge of the base, she parked and stepped out. The desert air was cold against her face, sharp enough to steady her thoughts. The Cross home was modest, neat lived in, with a small porch, light glowing against the dark. She knocked once quietly. After a few moments, the door creaked open, not by Liam, but by a small voice. Hi. Faith froze. The girl standing there had the same wide hazel eyes she remembered from old family photos, the same ones her brother used to have. She wore an oversized t-shirt and held a small flashlight shaped like a dolphin. Her hair, dark brown and wavy, fell over her shoulders like a soft shadow. Faith's voice trembled despite herself. Hello there. You must be Kira. The girl blinked. You know my name. Faith smiled faintly, trying to steady her voice. Your dad talks about you a lot. Kira grinned as if proud of that fact. He says I'm the brave one. I believe him. A rustle came from inside, followed by Liam's voice, low and wary. Kira. Who is it? He appeared a second later, his expression shifting the moment he saw Faith on the porch. He straightened instinctively, his old military bearing flickering back. General Lawson. It's late, ma'am. Faith nodded. I know. I'm sorry to come unannounced. I needed to speak with you. He hesitated, then stepped aside. Yes, ma'am. Please come in. The interior was simple, clean, but worn the walls decorated with Kira's drawings, airplanes, ocean rescues, and what looked like a pair of green rings surrounded by little phoenixes drawn in crayon. Faith's eyes lingered on that one before she turned back to Liam. Kira, oblivious to the gravity in the room, tugged at her father's sleeve. Daddy, can I show her the ring? Faith's breath caught. Liam froze, looking at her uncertainly, but before he could answer, Kira was already holding out her small hand. The jade ring gleamed under the lamplight, identical in every detail to the one on Faith's own hand. For a moment, neither adult spoke. Faith's heart pounded against her ribs as she crouched to Kira's level. May I see it? Sweetheart? Kira nodded and slipped the ring off. Faith held it delicately between her fingers, her vision blurring with emotion. The carving, the curve of the wings, everything matched perfectly. She looked up at Liam, her voice trembling. Where did she get this? He hesitated, his throat tight. From her mother. Linda left it for her. Faith stared at him. Linda Lawson Cross, she whispered. Your wife. He nodded. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the clock above the sink. Faith's composure began to crack. Her voice was softer when she spoke again. Mr. Cross, Did your wife ever tell you anything about her family?" Liam's eyes flickered with pain. She said she didn't have one, that everyone she knew was gone. Faith pressed her lips together, her eyes glistening. She wasn't gone. She was part of mine. Liam blinked, not understanding. "What are you saying?" Faith swallowed, her voice breaking as she said the words she had buried for 30 years. "Linda was my brother's daughter. Your wife was my niece." The silence that followed felt infinite. Liam's breath left him in a slow exhale. His gaze fell on the photograph on the table, the one of Linda with the man in uniform. Jay Lawson. And in that instant, he understood. Faith reached out, touching the jade ring gently in her palm. This ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a message, a promise from Jacob Lawson that his family would endure even when the world tried to erase it. Liam's voice was a whisper, and we were the ones who carried it. Faith nodded, tears shimmering on her lashes. "Yes, without even knowing it, you kept my brother's promise alive." Kira watched them quietly, her small voice breaking the silence. "Does that mean we're family?" Faith looked at her, unable to hold back the emotion any longer. She knelt and pulled the girl gently into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart," she whispered. "You are my family." Outside, the first pale light of dawn touched the desert horizon, glinting off 2 jade rings, one on the hand of a general, one resting in the palm of a little girl. For the first time in 30 years, the Lawson family had found its way home. The next morning, dawn spilled over the base like a slow exhale. Pale light touched the hangars, the flagpoles, the cafeteria windows, all the same places where duty had ruled for years. But inside, General Faith Lawson duty had just been replaced by something she'd long buried family. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red from reading through Jacob's file again and again, cross-referencing dates, missions, and the photograph Liam had shown her last night. It was impossible, and yet every piece fit. Linda Lawson Cross, her niece, the daughter of the brother the world had branded a traitor. Faith had been trained to face battlefield losses with composure. But this was different. The loss she'd mourned wasn't just her brother. It was an entire branch of her family tree pruned away by lies. Now she knew the truth, but she needed to see it once more to feel it. By Go 700, she was driving toward the residential wing again, her black sedan kicking up desert dust. Her fingers tapped the steering wheel unconsciously, the jade ring gleaming faintly with every flicker of morning sun. When she reached Liam's home, she hesitated before knocking. There was something deeply personal, even fragile, about standing outside the door of a man who'd unknowingly carried her family's bloodline forward. The door opened before she could decide. Kira stood there again this time, in a light blue dress, her hair tied in a lopsided braid. The jade ring glinted on her small hand. "Hi, General," she said cheerfully. "Daddy's making pancakes." Faith smiled despite herself. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart." "May I come in?" Kira nodded and skipped inside, calling over her shoulder. "Daddy, the lady from last night's here." Liam appeared moments later, wiping his hands on a towel. The smell of coffee and maple syrup lingered in the air. His expression was cautious, but not cold, just the steady calm of a man who'd lived long enough to respect the weight of silence. "Morning, ma'am," he said. "Morning, Mr. Cross." Faith replied, then added softly, "Please, just Faith today." He blinked, surprised by the tone. "All right. Faith." She took a deep breath, her eyes sweeping over the modest living room, the photos of Linda, the drawings on the wall, the life that had continued quietly beyond the reach of history. "I owe you an apology," she began, "for doubting you, and for doubting what your wife left behind." Liam shook his head. You don't owe me that, ma'am. You couldn't have known. Faith hesitated, then crouched beside Kira, who was busily arranging crayons on the table. Sweetheart, she said softly. Your mommy, did she ever tell you where she got that ring? Kira nodded without looking up. She said it was from her daddy, and that he told her to keep it safe because it was a promise. Faith's throat tightened. What kind of promise? Kira tilted her head, thinking. That no matter what happens, our family will always come back together. The words hit Faith like a bullet made of light. Jacob's voice echoed in her mind, his laughter the day he gave her the twin rings. One for you, Faith. One for the one who'll carry our name forward. Keep them safe, little sister. Faith had smiled then, thinking he was being sentimental. She'd tucked the ring away, never realizing the second one would someday find its way to the hands of his granddaughter. Liam watched her silently, his face softening as he saw the change in her expression. You knew him, didn't you? He asked gently. Jacob Lawson. Faith nodded slowly. He was my brother, and your wife was his daughter. Which makes Kira my niece, she finished for him, her voice trembling. My only living family. Liam sank into a chair, absorbing the words. He looked at Kira, innocent, bright, playing with crayons, and suddenly everything about her made sense. Her steady calm, her quiet curiosity, her natural grace. She carried the same unshakable steadiness. Her mother had the same spark of spirit he imagined Jacob once did. Faith took a slow breath and continued. When Jacob disappeared, they said he defected, that he'd betrayed his crew. But I never believed it. I spent years trying to find the truth, until I was warned to stop. Warned, Liam asked. She nodded. There were higher powers involved, files erased, orders rewritten. I was young then, and I didn't have the authority I do now. But I always kept this ring as proof of who he really was. She looked toward the window, the sunlight catching the jade stone on her hand. And now, here it is again, decades later, on your daughter's finger. The room fell silent. Even Kira seemed to sense the weight in the air. Faith turned to Liam, her expression resolute. I don't know how your wife found me, or why she didn't reach out, but I intend to find out. For Jacob, for Linda, for all of us. Liam nodded slowly. Then I'll help you. She looked at him surprised. You'd do that. I owe it to Linda, he said simply. She carried that secret her whole life. Maybe she was trying to protect something or someone. But if there's a truth she couldn't tell, I want to uncover it for her. Faith's eyes softened. You remind me of him, you know. My brother. He had that same calm, that same refusal to give up no matter how heavy the world got. Liam smiled faintly. Maybe that's why Linda loved me. Faith laughed softly, a sound she hadn't made in months. It felt strange and healing. Kira ran up to them, clutching a small folded piece of paper. I drew something, she announced proudly. She handed it to Faith. It was a crayon sketch, 2 rings glowing beneath a rising sun, and 3 people standing hand in hand. Underneath, in messy but determined handwriting, Kira had written, Keep the promise. Faith felt tears sting her eyes. She pulled Kira close, whispering, Your mommy would be proud of you, sweetheart. The little girl smiled up at her radiant. Daddy says when people keep their promises, the world gets better. Faith looked at Liam over Kira's head, and for the first time he saw the steel in the general's eyes soften into something entirely human gratitude. Outside, the desert wind shifted. The sunlight grew warmer, and somewhere deep within the walls of the base, an old truth stirred, ready to rise again. Faith stood, setting her jaw. I have work to do. There are records that were never meant to be found, but I'll find them. And when I do, Jacob Lawson's name will shine again. Liam extended his hand. "Whatever you need, I'm with you." She shook it firmly. "Then we start tomorrow." Together. As Faith walked back to her car, she glanced once more at the ring on her finger. It no longer felt like a relic of loss. It felt like a living pulse, one that now had another heartbeat beside it. The promise hadn't been broken. It had only been waiting. The sun had barely lifted over the mountains when General Faith Lawson strode into her office, her uniform sharp, her jaw set like carved steel. The sleepless night had done nothing to dull her resolve, it had sharpened it. A truth had surfaced, but truths she knew had a way of coming with consequences. She poured herself a cup of black coffee and stared out the window as jets streaked across the dawn sky. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about chain of command or logistics reports. She was thinking about Jacob. Her brother had died under a stain that was never his. And now that she knew his daughter had lived, Faith felt the fire that had driven her as a young officer return. This time, she wouldn't stop until his name was cleared. Faith sat down and opened her secure console. "Base intelligence clearance level Omega," she said aloud. The machine recognized her voice and flickered to life, a familiar hum filling the room. She began typing. "Jacob Lawson, case files, archive." The screen blinked, then displayed a red warning restricted. Files classified under internal review. Faith frowned. Override authorization. Lawson A27, another beep. Access. Limited. Contact Records Administration. She clenched her jaw. They've buried him again. Faith picked up the phone. "Colonel Davis." "Yes, General. I need everything the Defense Archives has on Colonel Jacob Lawson, full digital and hard copy, including classified mission logs." There was hesitation on the other end. "Ma'am, those records were sealed during the Pacific Operations Review in 1996. I'm not sure they even exist anymore." "Then find someone who is sure." Her tone was cold final. "Today." "Yes, ma'am." She hung up, exhaling slowly. The ring on her finger felt heavier than usual. That afternoon, the files arrived in a locked steel case. Faith signed the delivery slip, dismissed the courier, and set the case on her desk. The label read, "Lawson Jacob. Personnel history. Declassified portion." "Declassified portion," she muttered. "We'll see." She cracked the seals, opened the lid, and began leafing through the folders. Most were standard reports, commendations, flight logs, medals earned. Jacob had been one of the Navy's finest, a man respected by every peer he ever served with. But halfway through the pile, Faith found a file stamped, "Restricted Mission Phoenix." Her heart skipped. Phoenix. The same word carved into the twin jade rings. She opened it. Inside were scattered mission summaries, all heavily redacted. One line stood out beneath the black ink: Operation Phoenix. Objective secure evacuation of civilian medical personnel, South Pacific Hospital compound. Status compromised. Officer Lawson presumed KIA, possible defection. Her hands trembled. The same hospital where Linda Jacobs' daughter had once served. The same explosion that took her life years later. The threads connected too neatly to be coincidence. Faith flipped through the next few pages until a loose sheet fell out, an old audio transcript labeled "Recovered Voice Log, Lawson Flight Comms." She pressed play. The faint crackle of static filled the office, then Jacob's voice, distant but unmistakable. "If anyone hears this, we were set up. Orders were changed mid-air. The civilians, they're not supposed to make it out. I can't follow that. Tell Faith, don't let them bury this. Don't let them bury me." The recording cut to silence. Faith's breath caught. Her hand covered her mouth as tears burned behind her eyes. Her brother hadn't betrayed anyone. He had refused to obey a corrupted order. He'd died protecting the innocent. She sank back into her chair, the weight of it all pressing down. For 30 years, she'd lived under the shadow of that lie, building her career on the ruins of her brother's name. And now, at last, she had the proof she needed to clear him. But something else caught her attention. An annotation at the bottom of the file, handwritten in blue ink. All supporting materials, audio mission plans, debrief logs, archived under Personnel Code, LC3, restricted to internal review. Faith froze. LC3, Liam Cross. Her pulse spiked. Could Liam have been unknowingly holding the last piece of evidence all this time? She picked up the phone again. Colonel Davis, cross-reference LC3 with any personnel or mission files linked to Operation Phoenix. Right away, ma'am. Minutes later, he called back, his voice uncertain. General. The LC3 code links to a medical transfer manifest 8 years ago. The destination was the same hospital that exploded, the one where Linda Cross died. Faith's grip on the phone tightened. So the files weren't destroyed. They were there. Yes, ma'am. But the storage archive burned down in the explosion. Not all of it, Faith murmured. Something survived. It always does. That evening, Faith drove back to Liam's home. He was outside fixing a squeaky porch hinge, while Kira rode her bike in small circles nearby. General Lawson, he greeted standing. Faith, she corrected, automatically stepping closer. We need to talk. Inside, she spread the recovered documents across his table. The mission summaries, the photo of Jacob, the audio transcript. Liam's eyes darkened as he read them, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. My God, he whispered. He didn't defect. No, Faith said firmly. He refused an order that would have killed civilians. They called it treason to protect the officers who issued it. Liam shook his head. And they buried it. Yes. And now they've buried his daughter's death in the same fire that destroyed the evidence. He looked up. So what do we do? Faith straightened the commander in her, rising again. We rebuild the case. I still have contacts in the Department of Defense and the JAG Corps. If we can find even one witness or surviving technician from that mission, someone who can verify this recording, we can reopen Jacob Lawson's Court of Honor. Liam nodded slowly, resolve settling in his eyes. Then I'll help you find them. Faith smiled faintly. You remind me of him more every day. Outside, the desert sky turned crimson, streaked with gold, a phoenix sky. Faith gathered the papers into a folder and slipped the ring from her finger for the first time in 30 years. She placed it on the table beside Kira's smaller ring. 2 rings, she said quietly, 2 promises. Liam looked at her, understanding. Then let's keep both, he said. The rings gleamed side by side in the dying light symbols of truth, rising again from the ashes of betrayal. Neither of them knew it yet, but before the week was out, the name Jacob Lawson would echo across the halls of military command, once more, no longer as a stain, but as a resurrection. The first light of dawn crept over the Arizona desert, turning the horizon into a pale sheet of gold. On the airbase, the flag stirred slowly, catching the breeze before rising to full mast. Morning reveille sounded across the barracks, but inside the small housing unit on the edge of the base, the world felt unusually still. Liam Cross sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee untouched in front of him. The folder of classified papers lay open beside the wooden box, the one that had started it all. The 2 jade rings glowed faintly in the soft light, as if alive. He hadn't slept. Not really. His mind had replayed everything: Faith's revelation, Jacob's voice on the old recording, the truth buried under 30 years of lies. It was the kind of story that could rewrite everything he thought he knew about his wife, and about himself. Kira shuffled into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed dolphin. Daddy, she mumbled. You didn't sleep again, he smiled, gently brushing her hair back. Couldn't, sweetheart. Big things on my mind. She looked up at him wide-eyed. About Mommy. He nodded. And about the promise she made. Kira smiled sleepily. The one with the rings, yes. Liam whispered. That one. Across the base, General Faith Lawson stood by her window, the same light washing across her desk. Her uniform hung ready on the back of her chair, but she hadn't changed into it yet. Today, for the first time in decades, her war wasn't against an enemy, it was against history. The audio file still played softly on a loop, Jacob's voice crackling through the speakers. Each word struck deeper than the last. Tell Faith. Don't let them bury this. She turned off the recording and picked up the phone. Colonel Davis, she said, her voice low but steady. Schedule an emergency meeting with the Department of Defense Review Board. Noon. Tell them I'm reopening the case of Colonel Jacob Lawson. There was silence on the line. Then a cautious "Ma'am, are you certain that case was sealed?" For I'm certain. Yes, General. Understood. Faith hung up. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, hard eyes gray at the temples, but alive in a way they hadn't been for years. She slipped the jade ring back onto her finger, then gathered the files and drove to the Cross residence. Liam opened the door before she could knock. He looked like he'd been waiting for her. Faith, he greeted. Liam. She glanced at the folder in his hands. You found something else. He nodded. Something Linda wrote. I found it last night in the bottom of the box. He handed her a folded piece of paper. The edges were yellowed, but the handwriting, elegant, neat, was unmistakably Linda's. Faith unfolded it carefully. If you ever find this, it means the truth found you first. My mother never told me who my father was. She only said he died for something that mattered. When I was old enough, I found his name, Jacob Lawson, and I found her letters from him. I knew he wasn't a traitor. I joined the military hospital to prove it. But I think someone knew what I'd found. If anything happens to me, keep Kira safe. She carries his promise now. The ring will lead you back. Faith's eyes filled as she lowered the letter. The ink had bled slightly, as if tears had fallen on it once before. She knew, Faith whispered. She knew who she was. Liam nodded, and she knew someone was watching her. Faith's voice hardened. Then we'll finish what she started. They drove together toward the base command building, the desert sun rising behind them. Kira watched from the back seat, clutching her sketchbook, the same one filled with her drawings of rings and phoenixes. Faith parked in front of the administrative wing. As she stepped out, the young guards at the entrance straightened instinctively, saluting her. She returned the gesture absently. Her mind was already inside in the war room of truth. Inside her office, she spread the documents across the table. The mission reports, Jacob's photograph, the recovered audio log, and now Linda's letter. Liam stood beside her, silent but steady. Faith turned to him. I've spent years being the one who asks questions no one wants to answer. But I can't fight this alone anymore. You won't have to, Liam said simply. She looked at him, her composure softening. When this goes public, they'll come after me. And maybe you too. You sure you're ready for that? Liam gave a faint smile. I've already lost everything once. I'm not afraid of losing the rest, if it means my daughter grows up knowing where she came from. Faith exhaled the ghost of a smile crossing her face. You sound like my brother. He shrugged lightly. Maybe it runs in the family. By mid-morning, the review board had gathered an austere panel of officers in crisp uniforms, their medals catching the sterile light of the conference room. The kind of room where truth was often dressed as protocol. Faith stood before them unflinching. Liam sat behind her, the letter and audio recording ready in his hands. General Lawson, the presiding officer, began this request for reopening the case of Colonel Jacob Lawson has been denied multiple times in the past. What makes this time different? Faith met his gaze squarely. Evidence. Proof that was buried with the victims of the Pacific Hospital explosion 8 years ago. She gestured to Liam, who stepped forward and placed the files on the table. This, Faith continued, is a recovered audio log confirming that Colonel Lawson was following his orders until they were altered by an internal override. He chose to disobey to save civilians. For that, he was branded a traitor. The board members exchanged wary glances, and this, she said, holding up the letter, was written by his daughter, Linda Lawson Cross, who died in that same hospital explosion, still trying to uncover the truth her father died protecting. The room fell silent. Only the faint whir of the ceiling fan filled the air. One officer leaned forward. "General, these are serious accusations. You're implying a decades-long cover-up involving multiple administrations." Faith nodded. "Yes, and I'm implying it because it's true." Her voice was calm, but cutting every word measured and deliberate. "I've served this country for 40 years. I've seen good men destroyed because it was easier to erase them than admit someone made a mistake. Jacob Lawson wasn't one of those mistakes. He was a hero." The officers exchanged quiet murmurs, their eyes flicking between the evidence, the general, and the man standing silently behind her. Faith pressed the play button on the recorder. Jacob's voice filled the room again, raw and human. "Tell Faith, don't let them bury this. Don't let them bury me." When it ended, no one moved. Faith looked around the table, her voice trembling for the first time. "I didn't. And I never will." The presiding officer sat back slowly, his expression unreadable. "General Lawson, we'll review this evidence immediately." Faith gave a small nod. "That's all I ask." As they walked out of the building, the noon sun blazed high, scattering the shadows that had followed them for decades. Liam exhaled deeply. "You think they'll do the right thing?" Faith looked toward the flag flapping against the sky, the jade ring glinting on her finger. "I think the truth has a way of rising like a phoenix. Sometimes it just takes a little fire." They stood there together in silence, watching the light shimmer across the base, until the sound of jet engines roared above them, wings slicing through the bright sky, free again. For the first time in years, Faith felt her brother's presence in that sound, and the weight she'd carried for 3 decades began to lift. The dawn had finally brought more than light, it had brought redemption. The sky above the Washington, D.C. Military Tribunal Hall was a deep, commanding blue, the kind that only appeared after a storm had cleared. Flags rippled along the marble steps, their movement solemn, almost reverent. Inside, the Great Seal of the United States gleamed above the dais, and beneath it, rows of officers in dress uniform sat in disciplined silence. It had been weeks since Faith Lawson reopened her brother's case. Weeks of investigations, interviews, and late-night hearings that stretched until dawn. Every new document pulled from the shadows had confirmed what she already knew. In her bones, Colonel Jacob Lawson had never betrayed his country. He had died trying to protect it. But this morning would decide whether the world finally learned that truth. Faith adjusted her uniform collar and took a slow, steady breath. Though her posture was sharp as ever, Liam could see the tension beneath her calm decades of loyalty, balanced against a lifetime of grief. He stood a few feet behind her, the polished wooden box, with the twin jade rings tucked carefully under his arm. Kira sat quietly beside him, her small hands folded in her lap. She'd insisted on being here. "It's Grandpa Jacob's day," she'd said. Faith had smiled softly at that. "Yes, sweetheart, it is." Now, as they entered the hall, every eye turned toward them, not out of gossip or curiosity, but out of something deeper respect. The presiding officer, an older man with medals heavy on his chest, called the room to order. His voice echoed against the paneled walls. "This court is now in session for the purpose of reviewing the service record and final actions of the late Colonel Jacob Lawson, United States Navy. A murmur of movement followed. The prosecutor, a stone-faced man from the Defense Historical Division, stood to begin. General Lawson, you've petitioned this court to reopen a case sealed nearly 3 decades ago. On what grounds? Faith stepped forward, her tone even precise. On the grounds that the evidence used to convict my brother's memory was falsified, that Operation Phoenix was sabotaged, not failed, and that Jacob Lawson's last recorded transmission proves he was obeying the moral and legal code of this nation. She gestured toward the screen, where a military technician cued the recovered audio. The familiar static filled the chamber. Then Jacob's voice emerged, calm yet urgent. This is Colonel Lawson. Civilian compound is under fire. Orders received, our invalid coordinates were changed. We are staying until the last evac is out. Tell Faith. Tell her the promise still stands. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Liam's chest tightened. He'd heard it before, but never like this. Not through the resonance of a courtroom, not before the eyes of a nation. Faith stood motionless, her hands clasped behind her back. For a long moment no one spoke. Then the prosecutor cleared his throat. Admirable words, General. But this single log doesn't prove falsification. Do you have supporting evidence? Faith nodded once. Yes. She turned toward the back of the room, and the doors opened. An elderly man in a faded navy jacket entered, slowly leaning on a cane. The courtroom rippled with whispers. This is Master Chief Robert Givens, Faith said. He was Colonel Lawson's communications officer during Operation Phoenix. He's the last living witness. The old sailor saluted the panel. Permission to speak freely, sirs. Granted. Givens took a deep breath. We were told to stand down that night. But the new coordinates we got, they weren't from HQ. Lawson caught it first. He checked the signal chain and realized the orders were coming from an internal relay, someone trying to erase evidence of a failed evacuation. He refused to comply. The prosecutor frowned. And how do we verify that claim? Givens reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, dented flash drive. Because I kept the transmission log, sir. 30 years in a drawer, waiting for someone brave enough to ask again. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps. Faith's hand trembled slightly as the technician plugged in the drive. Lines of code appeared on the large screen, time-stamped signals, message origins, and one encrypted command from a deleted internal channel. The presiding officer adjusted his glasses. This is direct evidence of falsified orders. The prosecutor sank slowly back into his chair. Faith exhaled, steady but emotional. Jacob Lawson refused to abandon those civilians. He stayed until the compound exploded because of the enemy strike that came when those false coordinates were used. He died doing his duty. The officer at the bench looked around the room. Then the question before this court is clear. Was Colonel Lawson's conviction in error, and should his record be amended to reflect his honorable service? The panel whispered among themselves for several minutes that felt like eternity. Liam's hand tightened around the box in his arms. Kira leaned closer to Faith, sensing the gravity of the moment. Finally, the presiding officer stood. His voice carried through the hall. After review of new testimony and classified evidence, this court finds that Colonel Jacob Lawson acted with honor and integrity in the line of duty. The charges of defection and misconduct are hereby rescinded. His record will reflect valor under fire. His name will be reinstated in the roll of honor. Faith's breath hitched. The room broke into restrained applause, followed by the solemn sound of officers rising to their feet in silent salute. Liam stood, 2 eyes glistening. He opened the wooden box. Inside lay Jacob's ring, the one Linda had passed to Kira, now resting beside Faith's. Faith turned toward him. Their eyes met and she whispered, "He's free now." Liam nodded. "You freed him." She shook her head. "We did. The presiding officer stepped forward, extending his hand. General Lawson, it's been a long time coming. Your brother's courage will be remembered. Faith accepted the handshake, her composure unbroken, though tears traced quietly down her face. As the ceremony concluded, the hall began to empty, but Faith remained. She approached the memorial wall at the back of the room, a slab of polished black granite engraved with names of the fallen. She found her brother's. For years it had borne a small mark, an asterisk denoting dishonor. Now a technician stood ready with a chisel and cloth. With a gentle stroke, he removed the mark. Faith touched the name with her fingertips. "Welcome home, Jacob," she whispered. Behind her, Kira tugged softly on Liam's sleeve. "Daddy," she said, "can we show Grandpa's ring at the ceremony tomorrow?" Liam smiled faintly. "We will, sweetheart. He'd like that." Faith turned her eyes full of quiet pride and grief intertwined. "Yes," she said softly. "Tomorrow, the world will see that a promise kept can outlast any lie." They left the hall together, an unlikely family bound by truth, walking into sunlight that felt like redemption itself. The wind carried faint echoes of salute commands and the rustle of flags, as if even the air was standing at attention. And somewhere above in the boundless blue, Jacob once flew through it, seemed the sky itself whispered back, clear view and forgiven. The sun broke through the clouds over Arlington that morning, spilling a quiet golden light across the marble of the memorial hall. The courtyard outside was already filled, officers in dress uniforms, veterans in medals and caps, families clutching folded flags. But at the center of it all stood a single podium, flanked by 2 glass cases. Inside them, the twin jade rings caught the light glowing like tiny flames reborn. The ceremony was about to begin. General Faith Lawson stood near the podium, her uniform immaculate, her medals glinting under the morning sun. Yet for once, she did not stand as a commander, but as a sister. The weight of 30 years had fallen from her shoulders. She carried only the gentle ache of remembrance now. Behind her, Liam adjusted Kira's small blazer. The girl clutched a folded program titled, "Colonel Jacob Lawson, Restored to Honor." Her handwriting had added 3 words beneath it. "For Mommy, too." Faith looked at the inscription and smiled faintly. "She's got her mother's touch," she said softly. Liam nodded, and her grandfather's heart. The air was crisp at the flag above them at half-mast, fluttering gently in the wind. When the bugle sounded, the crowd fell silent. An announcer's voice echoed over the speakers. "Today we gather not to mourn a fallen soldier, but to celebrate a promise kept." 30 years ago, Colonel Jacob Lawson gave his life protecting civilians under fire during Operation Phoenix. His courage was buried by mistake. His honor was buried by bureaucracy. But truth, the voice paused, has a way of rising. Faith stepped forward to the podium. Her voice carried with calm authority, but her tone trembled at the edges. "My brother Jacob was a man of few words. He believed that promises weren't meant to be spoken, they were meant to be lived. He died keeping his. And in doing so, he gave our family a second chance at remembering who we are." Her gaze swept the crowd, then settled briefly on Liam and Kira. "And when I first met the man who helped uncover this truth, I thought he was just a quiet janitor, a humble man sweeping the floors of a base I commanded. But I learned that some of the greatest acts of courage don't wear uniforms anymore. Sometimes they carry mops instead of medals, hope instead of rank." Liam lowered his head, his eyes glassy. Faith continued, her voice steadying. "Because of him, and because of a little girl who still believed her mother's ring could make the world better, we stand here today, not in shame, but in pride." She lifted a small velvet box from the podium and opened it. Inside lay a medal, Jacob's posthumous Medal of Valor, reinstated by the Department of Defense. The crowd rose to their feet as she pinned it onto a folded Navy flag. Faith's next words came quieter, more intimate, as if speaking directly to the brother, whose name gleamed on the memorial wall behind her. Jacob, we kept your promise. Your family's still here. Your name is clean, and your fire still burns in all of us. She stepped aside. Liam took her place at the podium, the weight of the moment reflected in his voice. 8 years ago, my wife Linda died, thinking her family's story ended in tragedy. But standing here today, I know she was wrong. Her daughter carries the same light her grandfather once did. And I know, wherever Linda is, she's proud. He turned to Kira, kneeling so their eyes met. Sweetheart, your mommy's promise brought all of us here. Do you want to tell them what you said this morning? Kira hesitated, glancing at the crowd, then leaned toward the microphone. Her voice was small, but clear. Mommy said the ring was a promise, that families never really break apart. They just take time to find each other again. The crowd stirred, softly, moved. A few soldiers dabbed at their eyes. Faith crouched beside Kira, resting a hand on her shoulder. And you, young lady, kept that promise better than any of us. She reached into her pocket and drew out her jade ring. This ring was your great-uncle's gift to me, a symbol of duty, honor, and hope. It's time it belongs to the next keeper. Kira's eyes widened as Faith slid the ring gently onto her finger, beside the smaller one she already wore. The twin phoenixes gleamed side by side, their wings seeming to mirror one another in the sunlight. One ring for the one who built the promise. Faith said, her voice breaking. And one for the one who kept it alive. Liam swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the rings, the generations of meaning they carried. Faith, he began softly. Thank you for giving her something to believe in again. Faith met his eyes and smiled faintly. She gave it to me first. For a moment, the wind hushed, the sunlight deepened, and it felt as if the entire world was holding its breath. Then, from behind the memorial wall, a Navy honor guard raised their rifles. The command rang out sharp and clear. Ready, aim, fire. 3 volleys cracked across the open air. The echo rolled through the trees like thunder fading into peace. Buglers lifted their instruments. Taps began a slow, aching melody that carried through the courtyard like a benediction. As the final note lingered, Faith stepped back to the podium one last time. There's a line my brother wrote before his final mission, she said softly. I never understood it until today. He said, when the ashes settle, look for the wings. That's where you'll find us. Her gaze lifted toward the sky, where the morning light shimmered through the flag's folds, and for an instant, the fabric glowed the same deep green as jade. She looked down at Kira. The phoenix has risen again. The crowd stood in silence, many with hands over their hearts. And as the ceremony ended, Faith, Liam, and Kira approached the glass display together. Inside, the 2 rings now rested side by side on a velvet cushion, forever joined, forever alight. The engraving beneath read 1 for those who built the promise, 1 for those who kept it. Faith reached out, placing her hand on the glass. Rest easy, Jacob, she whispered. Your fire still flies. Liam took Kira's hand. Come on, sweetheart, he murmured. Let's go home. As they turned to leave, the wind picked up again, gentle, warm, carrying with it a sense of completion. The 2 rings shimmered under the sunlight, their reflection merging into the faint outline of a phoenix spreading its wings. And for a brief, perfect moment, it seemed to lift from the glass, alive, eternal, free. A month later, the world outside the base seemed quieter, softer, like the air itself had exhaled after decades of holding its breath. The story of Colonel Jacob Lawson's redemption had swept through every corner of the military press and beyond. News anchors spoke of the man whose courage outlived the lie, and photos of Faith standing beside Liam and Kira at the memorial had gone viral across veteran networks. To most people, it was just a story of justice delayed, but for the three of them, it was something deeper, the restoration of a name and the rebirth of a promise. Faith Lawson's boots clicked against the marble floors of the Pentagon one final time. Her resignation letter lay signed on the mahogany desk before her, short, precise, and characteristically calm. After 40 years in uniform, she was stepping away, not in defeat, but in peace. As she looked around her office, its walls lined with commendations and framed maps of missions, she'd commanded her gaze landed on a small glass case on the corner shelf. Inside, a faded photograph of two young siblings in navy whites smiled back at her. Jacob and Faith, long before the war, long before secrets. She smiled softly. "We kept the promise, Jake," she whispered. When she closed the door behind her for the last time, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a return. Outside, the base had gathered for a quieter ceremony that morning, a new beginning. A small banner stretched across the entrance of the newly built educational center near the airfield. The words shimmered in the morning sun. "The Lawson Promise Fund for the children of the fallen." Faith stood at the edge of the crowd, hands clasped behind her back, as Liam stepped up to the podium. His old green fatigues had been pressed clean for the occasion. He looked both humbled and proud, the way men do when they find themselves at the center of something larger than their own story. When Faith told me she wanted to start this fund, Liam began. I told her she didn't need to put our name on it. She said she wasn't. She said she was putting Jacob's promise on it, the promise that no sacrifice would be forgotten and no family would be left behind. He paused, scanning the faces before him: pilots, mechanics, cafeteria, workers, young cadets who'd grown up hearing whispers about the Lawson case. "This isn't just a scholarship," he continued. "It's a lifeline. For every kid who's lost a parent in service, it's a reminder that they're not alone. That kindness and courage don't end with a uniform." Faith watched him quietly, her heart swelling with a pride she couldn't name. Then Kira took the stage. Her small hands gripped the microphone as she glanced nervously at the crowd. Faith knelt beside her, giving a reassuring nod. Kira took a deep breath and spoke, her voice clear and soft. "My mommy said, good people keep their promises, even when it's hard. My grandpa did that. My daddy does that. And now, we all can too." The crowd murmured with warmth. A few soldiers smiled. Others blinked back tears. Faith's hand found Liam's for a brief moment, an unspoken exchange of strength, of gratitude. Two lives that had once collided by accident were now bound by purpose. Later that afternoon, after the crowd had gone and the sunlight had turned amber across the tarmac, Faith walked with Liam and Kira to the memorial courtyard. At its center stood a new glass case, flanked by small granite benches and a bronze plaque etched with simple words, "For those who kept the promise." Inside the glass, resting on a dark velvet base, lay the two jade rings side by side, eternally lit by the afternoon sun. The carvings of twin phoenixes caught the light just right, forming the faint illusion of motion. Wings outstretched, ready to rise. Kira pressed her small hand to the glass. "They look like they're flying Daddy." Liam smiled. "Maybe they are, sweetheart." Faith stood a few steps away, her eyes glistening. Jacob always said the phoenix was a symbol of renewal. He believed that no matter how much gets lost, something good always rises again. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, Jacob's handwriting preserved after decades. "For Faith, keep the promise." She laid it gently at the base of the glass. "Now it's kept," she whispered. As the sun began to dip, the courtyard filled with the long shadows of the flagpoles. Faith, Liam, and Kira sat together on one of the benches, watching the amber light glow through the rings. "You ever think you'll go back to flying?" Faith asked softly. Liam smiled faintly. "Maybe one day. But for now, I think I'm right where I'm supposed to be. The cafeteria needs fixing, and Kira's got homework." Faith chuckled quietly. "A hero with a mop. I suppose there's a symmetry in that." He grinned. "Heroes come in all uniforms, ma'am. Some of us just trade ours for aprons." Her laughter faded into a thoughtful silence. "You know, I spent half my life thinking leadership meant giving orders. But now, I think it's about keeping faith literally and figuratively." "Seems fitting," Liam said. Faith smiled. "Maybe that's why you found me. Maybe Jacob knew I'd need a janitor to remind me how to clean the dust off an old promise." The wind carried a faint sound through the air, like wings brushing against glass. They all looked up. A formation of jets passed overhead, their tails catching the sunlight, leaving trails of silver across the sky. Kira pointed her eyes bright. "Look, the phoenixes are flying." Liam wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Yeah, baby. They are." Faith tilted her head back, the glow of the setting sun catching her eyes. "And they always will." For a moment the world held still, the sound of the jets fading into silence, the breeze whispering through the memorial courtyard. 2 generations sat together beneath the sky that had once taken everything from them, and now gave it all back. Truth, peace, and the unshakable knowledge that promises real ones never die. As the last light of day washed over the rings, their twin reflections merged into a single glowing symbol, a phoenix rising wings, wide eternal. Faith's voice was barely a whisper. He kept his promise, Liam, and now, so have we. Liam looked toward the horizon, his hand resting on his daughter's. "Then I guess that means the promise lives on." The light faded, but the rings burned on steady, bright alive. "We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today?" It's always amazing to see how these stories of hope and kindness reach hearts from every corner of the world. If this story touched you the way it touched us, we'd be truly grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel, Soul Moment Story. Every click, every comment, and every share helps us continue bringing you more heartfelt tales that celebrate love, courage, and the quiet strength of everyday people. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember, a promise kept can change a life.